So now that you've learned how to use JSON and how to get some JSON data from the web and then interpret it and use it in your app, we're going to apply that to our What's the Weather app. So what we're looking for is something like this, where you can enter a city and then we can enter a city name such as London, tap What's the Weather, and then the weather is displayed right there underneath. So pretty much everything you've done before, so it should be a reasonably straightforward app to make. I'm just going to very quickly show you where I got that background image from. I like this website unsplash.com. If you want sort of quite generic backgrounds that are completely free to use in any apps, really can make your app look a lot more attractive. And of course, we're going to be using the OpenWeatherMap API, which we saw in the previous lecture, which has content like that. So as always, strongly encourage you to have a go at this yourself. Best of luck. All right, I hope that went well. I'm going to begin, of course, by creating a new project. And I'm going to call it What's the Weather. I'm just going to avoid the apostrophe there because it can cause issues in package names. I'd recommend not putting punctuation in there if you can avoid it. And then blank activity, same one there. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to try and make this app look a little bit prettier. So I'm going to go to unsplash.com, where you have a bunch of fairly generic but often very pretty photos, and I'm going to find one that might have something vaguely to do with weather. That one's nice, but it's going to cause problems when we try and put text over that, I think, depending on where the text ends up. We need something a bit more generic. Aha, I think this will be great. I like the look of that one. Okay, so I'm just going to save image as, and I'm just going to put it right there on the desktop. And I'll call it background. Okay, back over to Android Studio. Here we are. So let's start by importing our image. So remember, we're going to drag that into Drawable. So I've just control clicked. You can right click on Windows and then reveal in Finder or Windows Explorer. And then I'm going to open a new tab with Command T, click on desktop, and then just drag in my background.jpg image. There it is. So now if we go back over to Android Studio, with any luck, it'll be there. Lovely. Yep. If it's not, remember, you can just synchronize it to make it appear there. Great. So let's get rid of Hello World and let's drag in our lovely image view. Goes without saying that making a simple app, it looks a lot prettier if you can get a nice pretty image on the background. And it's very easy to do as well. So I'll change the width and height to fill parent. And then we'll set the SRC. Whoops. I do find that annoying. There we go. Background. We'll just see how that looks in the default. So that's not quite what we're going for. But don't worry. We can edit that with scale type. So here you can see if we want to stretch it, X and Y, that looks pretty good. Fit start, fit center, and fit end are obviously not quite what we want here, but we could try center crop. I like that too. Center inside, not what we want. So now I'm going to go for center crop. I think that looks nice with this particular image. And then let's drag in what we need. So we've already got the title, we don't need that again. But I'm going to bring in a text view, which I'm going to want to be centered. enter a city. And then here, I definitely want a margin at the top there. Let's try 50 dps. Yep, I like that. And we definitely want it a fair bit bigger. Let's try 20 SP. A little bigger, I think, even than that. Try 30. Yep. I like that. And I want to change the color. I think it would look good if we make it completely white. So we do that with bringing everything to 255. Yeah, I like that. Then we'll have our text field to get the weather. So again, we want it centered, and we want it not to the left of text view, we want it directly underneath text view. There we go. We'll change it to the width of the whole screen. Actually, maybe that might look a bit weird. Let's add a padding to the left of, let's try 40 dp. Yep, I like that. So notice because it's centered, it's automatically added a right one as well. And then finally, we'll just need a button to find out the weather. So again, we want it centered and below the text input. And we'll say, what's the weather? And actually we can leave the ideas button, that's fine. But we'll want, of course, an on click. And we'll call it find weather. Okay, and then I think I just want to add a little bit of a margin to the top of that button, just to move it down slightly. It's maybe a little too much. Okay, lovely. And then finally we'll have a label which will appear down here to give us the weather. So actually I want to align it to the bottom this time. And we'll have a margin on the bottom to bring it up. Let's try 100 dps. Maybe slightly more. Great. Change the text size again. Perhaps 30 SP. I think that might be a little bit large, as we've got to have quite a bit of information there. And finally, we'll change the width to, actually leaving it as wrap content should be fine, because then it will grow as necessary. But I will actually change the color. I think the white works better against that background. Lovely. All right. So we'll try now adding the code to find the weather. So you'll be relieved to hear that I'm not going to take you through the whole process of downloading our JSON and then processing it line by line, because we've done that several times now. I hope you think that you're reasonably expert on that. So I'm just going to copy that over from JSON demo and then add it here. And you can see very nicely it's added all the classes that we might need, so we don't have to do that manually. Great. So now let's create our method for finding the weather. So we called it find weather. And that's going to be called by our button view. And the one variable that we're particularly interested in there is the city name. So we need a way to get that. I think we should give that a better ID. Yep, we'll update those. So city name. And then we'll just add that to our code. So it's an edit text. And I'll define it up there. City name, and then in onCreate we'll find it. So as we know, it's an edit text. Find view by ID, resources.id dot city name. So as we've done quite a lot of stuff here, all I'm going to do for now is log the value of city name. So city name dot get text. Dot toString to convert it to a string. Okay, so we're not actually using our download task at all, but I just want to make sure everything looks okay on the emulator screen, and then make sure it's all connected up, and when we tap the button we should find whatever the user has typed in the city name in the logs. Alright, let's see. Now I actually got a crash there, and I thought I'd leave it in just to show you. We've got an out of memory error. Now if you have a think about what could be causing that, we haven't done a lot here, but we have just imported this quite large image. So I suspect the problem is that our image is too big. So in your Mac, there's an easy way to resize images. So you just double click on it and then Tools, Adjust Size, and yeah, this is a lot bigger than what we need. So let's try and reduce it to maybe 500 pixels. So it's now 21 kilobytes rather than 336. So that should make it rather more manageable. I don't know an easy way to resize images on Windows, I'm afraid, but a quick Google on that should get you a way of doing it. So fingers crossed we shouldn't get that crash this time. And there we go. I like the look of our app. So let's just give it a shot. London. What's the weather? And all we want is to see London somewhere down here. There it is. Fantastic. So it's all working as far as we'd expect. All that remains is to actually get the weather for that particular location. So we might as well copy and paste the commands that do it. So they are here. So now the only difference, of course, is that instead of London, we want whatever the user has typed. So let's add in city name. There we go. So that should print the information to the logs from the JSON. So let's check that. And now you can start seeing hopefully where all these exceptions might come in useful, because we're allowing the user to edit essentially our URL string here. So that could really go horribly wrong if they either don't enter anything at all, or if they enter something that's not going to allow this to be a valid URL. Then we don't want our app to crash, we just want to give them a message. And of course we mustn't forget to set the permissions in the manifest. There we go, Android Studio knows what we want now. So now we should find that we can log the weather of any city we like. Here we go. So let's try Shanghai. What's the weather? Okay, let's take a look. Fantastic. So there's our main content, and we've got clouds, few clouds. That's all we've got about this particular weather. It's quite brief, this API, but that's fine. So now all we need to do is make sure that the weather is updated on the app itself rather than just in the logs, which isn't particularly useful. So let's just jump back over to activity main and check the ID. So text view 2 isn't great. I'll call it result text view. And while we're here, let's just get rid of the default text there, because we don't want any default text to appear. And then we want a text view. I've already forgotten what I just called it. Result text view. And we'll find it here. So it's a text view, and we're going to find it using its ID, resources.ids, and result text view. I do prefer a space in there. Okay. Now, remember I said that in the onPostExecute method, we can interact with the user interface. So it's up to you how you want to actually display this information. But what I'm going to do is create a string main, which will initially be empty, and a string description, which will initially be empty. And then obviously I'm going to set main to be the main part of the JSON, and then description to be the description part. And then I'm just going to test to see if main is not an empty string and description is not an empty string. That means that we have a type or a main and a description. So if that's the case, we can update our message string, which means we're going to need a message string. So we'll set that initially empty up there. So we'll set message to have appended to it main, and then I'm going to have a colon and a space, and then the description. And then I want a new line. And to do a new line, as I think we've seen before, we use \r\n for a line break. So this will give us a new line at the end of this bit of code, which will have the type. So that is rain or drizzle or whatever, and then the description. And then finally, when we've looped through all of that, we'll check if message is non-empty, or non-empty string. Then we'll update the result text view with it. So result text view dot set text and then message. Okay, let's just have a quick look at that. See if it works. So let's try Paris this time. What's the weather? And you can see we're in a fun situation here. We can't see the result, whether or not it's worked, because the keyboard is in the way. So we need a way to remove the keyboard as soon as the button is tapped. And we can do that in Android fairly shortly, although it's not that simple. We need to create a variable of the type input method manager, and we'll call that MGR, short for manager. And this is going to be an input method manager, and we're going to get it from, this time, get system service. And the system service that we want to get is context dot input method service. So this gets the input method service that our app is currently using, which is the keyboard. And then we want to take that manager and use it to hide soft input from window, which does what it says on the tin. And then we just need to specify the window, which we get from the name of the edit text that we're currently in. So city name, and then dot get window token. So that tells us which window. And then we put a (0) because there are various other options or flags that we can put there if we want, but you probably won't ever use those. So we'll just put (0) to hide the keyboard in the normal way. Right, so that's a very good skill, to be able to hide the keyboard when you want to. Usually it's when a button has been tapped. Let's take a look now. Okay, so I'm going to try again with Paris. What's the weather? There we go. So it's not the fullest error message, or not the fullest weather description as we see, but it's what we've got. I suspect if you have a look at the OpenWeatherMap API in more detail, we can get more detailed sort of weather, or just a general overall weather description. Okay, so we're nearly there. We just have one thing that I'd like to deal with, and that's what happens if the user enters something empty, or something which isn't a city. And the answer is nothing, which is fine. At least the app doesn't crash. And the reason it doesn't crash is because we've got all our exceptions and tries and catches everywhere. But it would be nicer to give a message to the user if that fails. So I'm going to just add that feature in to add a toast to the user in case of exceptions. So I'll have toast make text and then get application context. And so here we'll say could not find weather. And then we'll have just toast.length long. So you can put a more detailed error message in there if you like, but I'm just keeping it very simple here. And so that will occur if they enter something that's not a valid URL, or if their data connection isn't connected. But there's also a possibility that we won't be able to get anything from the JSON. So I'm going to add another message there. I'm just going to leave the message as the same thing, but again, you might want to have a different error message there. Or if we actually get an error with the JSON, that will need an error message as well. And finally, what about cities that have spaces in their names or strange characters? If we try and put, say, San Francisco in, that will currently give us an error because it won't be able to create the URL string because it has a space in it. So what we'll do is we'll encode it as a URL. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we'll create a string encoded city name, which we're going to get from there, but we're going to use a URL encoder, to encode it and the usual format is UTF-8. And there's a possibility that that will fail, so once again we'll put it around try and catch, and I'll pop these in try, and I'll just add the error message again to the catch, and then we can put encoded city name in there. Alright, and while that's compiling, I'll just show you what we're doing there. So this is the URL that we have when we don't need the comma UK at the end, when we've got something without a space in, like London. If I try and put San Francisco in there, let's see what happens. You can see it converts it to San%20 Francisco. And but that %20 is an encoded space, and it's encoded in a format that URLs can read. So the API for OpenWeatherMap will be expecting San%20 Francisco rather than San space Francisco. And that's what this encoding will do. So it will replace any strange characters like spaces or apostrophes or anything like that with their URL equivalent. So let's just check. If we now put in San Francisco, there it is. What's the weather? And apparently it's misty. Okay, great. So there's our What's the Weather app, which can now cope with spaces in names as well. And that takes us to the end of this section. So congratulations for making it this far. We'll see what you've covered in the next lecture. But for now, give yourself a pat on the back, go have a cup of tea before getting ready to work with maps and locations in section 7.